Yeah, they do like polls and they get like the like surveys and shit for like people's opinions.
It's called the Phil Surveys paper. You can just Google Phil Surveys paper results, and it should be the first thing that pops up. There's actually two of them, one for 2020, one for 2019. The 2021 is the one that has the PSR on it.
Yeah, one of the most interesting surveys that I found there was that the majority of the people, all the philosophers there, subscribe to like some human ethical standard.
You mean moral realism?
I don't remember if it's moral realism or not. Hold on, let me see if I can still get it. Give me a second.
Yes, most philosophers who are mostly atheists subscribe to moral realism.
It's surprising because like the usual claim made is that only theists can.
Allahu Akbar!
Yeah. Okay.
Just turn all my volume down. Yeah, so the claim most atheists on YouTube make is that you need to be a theist to believe in objective morality, but most atheists in general disagree. Most philosophers who are atheists disagree. That's just a YouTube atheist claim.
Okay, here's the survey. Hold on.
Wait, they claim you can't be a moral realist? I haven't seen them claim that.
What? So yeah, most like...
Oh, dude, several people claim that. Several people claim that only under a theist narrative you can subscribe to moral realism.
Oh wait, like atheists say that online?
Yeah, like a lot of atheists, like Aaron Ra, Dillahunty. They
Wait,
believe...
they say like you can't be a moral realist?
More likely they claim that it's not possible for moral realism. There's nothing for objective morality to correspond to. The position is moral nihilism or moral subjectivism. Those positions are positions that morality can't be objective.
Yeah, that's fair enough, yeah.
What's your stance?
I'm a moral realist. I wrote a model of objective morality.
Do you have an argument for moral realism?
Sort of yes, sort of no. So I think that there are patterns in moral intuition and moral progress, and those patterns are consistent among all species and all locations. And if this pattern is correct, then we could expect that there is some cause to this pattern, and that would be some presumable law of physics that we haven't discovered yet, and that would be a grounds of moral realism.
I mean, yeah, the usual argument that is given is like under the SCP article notion of moral realism, which is like extends to independent reasons. And people argue that there are stance independent reasons.
Well, reasons don't matter. Like reasons are like epistemic. What we're looking for is ontological. Like so, there needs to be stance independent ontological something to ground morality.
Yeah.
Because there could be stance independent reasons, but it would still be subjective. Like your reasons could be, I don't know, the length of a ruler is 1 foot or whatever, and that's stance independent, but still subjective.
Yeah, the thing is that's how standard encyclopedia defines moral realism to be. Like the formal definition of it is apparently that just there being a sense independent reasons.
Oh yeah, sense independent, meaning it's something that exists independent of the senses, sure. Does anybody have any questions or arguments for God's existence or morality questions?
Yeah, so anyone that wants to speak up, wants to ask a question, go ahead.
Pretty sure Yezin does.
Oh. What's up, buddy?
Hey, how's it going?
Good, man. I want to ask you a question. If you would affirm, for example, in all cases relating to, let's say, like things that are claimed to be miraculous in religions, to always have a naturalistic explanation. So, say, for example,
could you ask what? Say that again. What was the question?
Okay, let's say, for example, I give you a series of claims about reality, prophecy-related material, claims about the past that, from a historical perspective, would not have really much of a probability and being like naturally explained, or at least available to know at the time. Right? Would you affirm, for example, that there's definitely a naturalistic case in all cases, or would you that there's potentially something supernatural when it comes to these kind of claims, if they're proven to be true, obviously?
Well, so scientists are always open to there being a supernatural something. Like no one's against there being a supernatural. The question is what's the most probable explanation? It's more probable that everything in history is explained by natural causes that we know about.
Huh. So what if you, for example, combine like the let's say calculation of probability in regards to the accessibility to some sort of knowledge that a person would have at the time. So let's say, for example, somebody makes a claim about something very, very specific that only, let's say, a microscope would be able to give you.
So one example would be in the Vedas. The Vedas predicts the age of the earth is 4.3 billion years old. The Vedas was written about 6,000 years ago. So yes, that would be a good piece of evidence of something. Yes. If it made lots of those,
has a supernatural explanation.
No. So if it made a lot of those that were all correct, then yes, that would be good evidence of the origin of the Vedas was like a god or whatever. But that
Buddha was a prophet of Islam, so that is good evidence for Islam there.
No, it's not. But so even though that one claim is a type of evidence that would be good if it happened a lot, since it only happened once, it's better explained by random chance than by an actual supernatural force. So, but yeah, if that did happen a lot, if there was tons of those, like if there was a book that was written 6,000 years ago that said DNA is a double helix, the world is 4.5 billion years old, the universe is 13.8 billion years old, and got it all right and none of them wrong, then yeah, that'd be great evidence.
Okay, and what do you think of prophecies?
Prophecies would be good evidence if they were precise, but none of them are precise.
Okay. So, let's say, for example, a hadith that we like to use, which is in the book of Sahih Muslim, 2645a. Okay, and this is in regards to the following three things in embryology. One claim is that on the 42nd day, the embryo is shaped. The other claim is that on the 42nd day, which you could probably say, oh, it's a little bit vague, right? But we could understand this to mean that there's some sort of shape given in a general sense regarding like the human shape. The second claim would be that the embryo is given the first senses of hearing, sense of sight, skin, flesh, bones. And then the other claim is that the full gender of the embryo is determined. Which, yes, like chromosomal sex is determined from the first week of conception, but gametal is not till the 6th week point. If all these claims, let's say, for example, of course, this hadith alone is not what I'm saying. Like, oh, three things in one. No, but let's say, for example, like something as precise as this, and it's actually scientifically accurate, and let's say several more of things like this, you would say is like sufficient enough to open the door for like a supernaturalistic explanation.
Well, that was already known by many people prior to Muhammad. Muhammad actually stole it from, I think it was Eastern scholars. It's where most of the information he got was from. There's also
What's the argument for that?
tons and tons.
What's the argument that he stole it?
There's also tons of errors in the Quran, like a lot of them, and scientific mistakes that were stolen from other people. So just getting a couple things right would only be evidence if you only got things right. But if you get a lot of things wrong, or if you get just a bunch of facts at random. But yeah, so that wouldn't be evidence at all because it was already known by Eastern scientists way before Muhammad.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, if you have a case to bring against the Quran or the Sunnah regarding like scientific errors, we're more than happy to defend them. When I give your if we refute all of them, then you would be left with, for example, the actual ones that are correct, and there's a multiplicity of them. So if you want to make it, and by the way, like the whole idea that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam an illiterate man got it from Galen and the Jews and the ancient Egyptians who
Wait,
actually looked into
but here's my
embryology.
question. Why do you think that the writer of the Quran was illiterate?
Oh yeah, well, we would obviously affirm that the Sunni tradition, as far as like
Why?
Sunni, advise,
Why would you affirm that
no,
tradition?
excuse me.
Why would you affirm the Sunni tradition to begin with, which is like 200 years dated after the supposed events?
Yeah, that's completely false. The Sahifa of Hammam bin Munabbih is far earlier than the earliest
One
collections
second,
of
who was the
Sahih
first
Sittah.
person who mentioned Sahifa Hammam ibn Munabbih? Who was the first person who mentioned that?
The book is dated to much earlier than 200 years.
It's not, there's a later book who quotes the full book. What's that book?
Excuse me?
And here's where you're gonna get fucked, Yazan, because you're like a fucking retard who doesn't actually read or know anything. This is where you're gonna get fucked. Who was the first person who quoted Sahifat Hammam ibn Munabbih?
The first person I'm not sure of, but I know the majority of his hadiths are found in Muslim and Bukhari.
I wasn't finished. Who was the first person who quoted the supposed student of Abu Huraira, Hammam ibn Munabbih? Who was the first guy? Go ahead, Yazan.
No idea, but the hadiths are found in Bukhari and
No
Muslim.
idea. I just want to be clear. Yazan is the fucking retard who was never in his...
I think you're a little bit drunk, though.
And
Venus. I think you're a little bit drunk.
No.
So, Venus, when you have... Venus,
name
present
me one
an argument, then you can bark like you can
I'm gonna
right now we have a guest that we're talking about topics.
But here's the thing. Name me one book you've read in your life from
No problem, Venus. بحشي رجلي في ثمك and then I'll read my books out to you. But for now, just stay muzzled and we'll continue the conversation civilly. Thank you very much.
Why is he trying to like jump on
Venus Imam's stuff, by the way.
He's not the guy is a complete like the guy. Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna deal with somebody who rejects the existence of like historically verifiable individuals like left and right just to make an argument.
Well, it doesn't matter who the first person who quoted him was. That's not relevant to any fact, true or false. It doesn't matter.
Thank you very much. So,
like, what is the 17th prime number? Like, it doesn't matter whether or not you know. It doesn't make any fact correct or incorrect.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, yeah, if you would like, for example, to present like an argument or a multiplicity of hadiths or verses, T-Jump, we can engage like in a nice, respectful dialogue and see if we can refute these.
My interest isn't in going through textual criticism. That's other people's interest. So you'd have to engage with them. I'm interested in philosophy and philosophical arguments.
No, this doesn't have anything to do with textual criticism, though, because I'm not asking to like give me some sort of argument against the preservation of the Quran or its contents.
No, that's not what a textual criticism is. So the criticism would be usually related to translation. Like if you know the original text, it can be interpreted in many different ways because languages from that generation didn't have strict interpretation. So one word can have like 6 different meanings, which means you could interpret any given statement about 100 different ways. Most of them are wrong, and you can cherry pick which ones seem the most right with the current data to try and make it fit. And that's one of the 10 million ways you can interpret.
But we don't. But the thing is, T-Jump, we don't have to get. Yes, interpretation is going to be a part of textual criticism. But to present a case against, for example, like the scientific accuracy of the things in the Quran or Sunnah, isn't going to require that, right? You could take any understanding that the majority use, and we could just roll with that. But if you're more interested in discussing philosophy, that's completely fine.
Yeah, that's more my interest is more philosophy. If you want to go to the actual errors, you just go to the Wikipedia. Wikipedia.
By the way, T-Jump, I did.
No, but T-Jump, the thing is like I said, like I'm not the philosophy guy, but I do appreciate the sincerity as far as like you.
No, but
for example, giving a criteria of evidence for a supernaturalistic explanation. So I'll let you continue.
Yeah, shut up for a second, Yazan. 1 second, T-Jump, are you there?
You're interrupting, bro. Like you're not him. Let them just talk.
I think you have another cage that you can bark in, though, Venus.
Venus, what is?
1 second, Yazan.
Blinkism. You're known for drinking and debating. So let's cool it down, okay?
Somebody else have questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, do me a favor. No, like profanity, because that would be bad for Twitch. Twitch doesn't like.
I have a question, T-Jump.
Yeah.
So, like, for
For example, for the law of non-contradiction, what's the argument you would use for it to prove it to someone if you're debating them? You know.
To prove it?
Yeah, I guess. Like, let's say I reject the law of non-contradiction in some cases. Then what would you say?
I would ask which model of logic you're using. I wouldn't try to prove it because laws of logic aren't true in that sense. They're ways that language are formed and ideas are formed. So if you use a non-standard logic, that's perfectly fine.
What's the argument?
Mm. But then would it not be like problematic? Because let's say your argument is based on classical laws, and the person who you're arguing against rejects it.
They're allowed to reject it. So like laws of logic are languages. It's literally the first sentence of classical logic in Stanford's Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Logic is a system of formal language and semantics, something like that. So if someone else rejects it, it'd be like speaking to someone who speaks a different language, like Latin. Whether or not they can understand or interpret your argument is going to be contingent on the language they use. And so whether or not they accept or reject the laws of logic doesn't in any way affect the coherency of your arguments. It just affects whether or not they will be able to understand it. So like they could make the argument, well, I don't accept that law of logic or whatever, at which point it doesn't matter whether they do or don't. You can just say, well, most of the audience does. And so my argument would be compelling to most of the audience. And so if you have a niche framework that nobody else accepts, that's fine, but I don't really care.
Okay.
By the way, I just want to say one thing. T-Jump, the guy earlier you muted, he says that he's Venus. I think you know him.
Yes,
I'm not
I, I don't. Well, I mean, I muted him because the other guy was calling him Venus, and he was saying retard a lot. So that was the reason I muted him.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have any questions, comments, arguments for God, morality, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I have a question.
Does Islam provide a foundation of objective morality? Have a view of morality?
Hey, jump.
Yeah. There's someone who wants to ask a question.
Do you have Real Sufi muted?
Yeah, I think he has me muted.
Oh, he's just really quiet. I can barely hear him.
Oh, turn him up. He's trying to talk to you.
All right, try now.
Hey, I'm new to philosophy, and I have like some questions. I want to learn regarding the laws of logic. Can you like answer some questions that I have?
Sure.
What are the laws of logic?
Depends which model of logic you're using. I assume you're using standard logic. If it's standard logic, then it would be the law of identity, law of excluded middle, and law of non-contradiction. But the non-standard logics have different laws.
Would you say that the laws of logics are propositions?
Sure.
So they cannot be like merely linguistic tokens, right?
No, they can still be merely linguistic tokens because
They
propositions
can be expressed by linguistic tokens as if I one second. Wait, someone's calling me. Give me 1 second. I want to learn more logic.
Sure. So a proposition is a statement or assertion that is expressed as a judgment or opinion. So yes, they are. All propositions are just figments of language.
But I think they can be expressed, but I don't think they're like merely linguistic tokens.
A proposition,
I think
statement
so.
or assertion that expresses a judgment or opinion, period.
What's the distinction between like a proposition and a statement?
Well, some statements they can exist that don't express a judgment or opinion. Like a state like colorless green dreams sleep furiously. That would be a statement, but it doesn't express a judgment or opinion, so it wouldn't be a proposition.
Why are the laws of logic truths about truths?
That is not a coherent question.
No, because the laws of logic are truths. What are the truths about? That's my question.
About the form of logic that you're using. So the laws of logic would be true about the particular type of logic you're using. So if you're using a non-standard logic, the standard laws of logic would be false, and then the non-standard laws of logic would be true. So truth is a property of sentences, and sentences describe something. So if you are describing a system of logic and using the laws of logic, then they would be true about that system of logic.
Are the laws of logic, are they necessary truths?
No.
They're not?
No.
What does that mean?
It means that there are other forms of logic. Like literally, you can just go to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, classical logic. I think it's section 7 where there are non-standard logics, and it goes through a list of all the non-standard logics that are potentially true.
Wait, so I don't. What do you mean by necessary truths?
A necessary truth is something that's true in all possible worlds. Could not.
So, like, is there a possible world where, like,
non-standard
laws
logics?
of logic-
Yes, there are possible worlds with non-standard logics. Yes.
So, like, why can I like just like reject all of your arguments because those can like be possibly false?
That doesn't make any sense.
I'm new to philosophy. Like, I don't get why you're telling me like
so
it doesn't make
logic
sense.
is
I'm
a
asking
way
you
to
questions.
express ideas, like a language, like English. So you can't say all of your arguments could be wrong because I'm using Latin. That doesn't make any sense. Literally makes no sense. So you would have to convert my sentences that I'm using in standard logic to non-standard logic and address it in that way. You couldn't just say, I accept a non-standard logic, therefore all of your arguments could be false. That's like saying, I speak Latin, therefore all of your English is wrong. Like, it doesn't work that way. So if you want to contrast one system of logic with another, you have to translate the sentences from the standard logic that I'm using into a non-standard logic and then address it from that way. You couldn't just say, well, it could be wrong if there's a non-standard logic. That doesn't work as an argument.
Why is that the case?
Because the laws of logic are a language, and if you're using a different language like Latin, you can't say, because I'm speaking Latin, your English is wrong. Doesn't work.
Why is that the case?
I just explained it to you.
No, why is it the case that I can't do that?
I just explained it to you.
Why is it the case that I have to accept your explanation?
You don't.
So why is your explanation even like, meaningful?
It's meaningful to people who understand philosophy.
I'm learning philosophy from you. I don't understand why you're like mentioning like me being like philosophically literate. This is going to be like tangential to my questions. So like, please, can you like stop diverting and engage in the conversation?
I'm not diverting. I answered your question literally, as you literally asked.
Why is it the case that I have to accept your answer?
You don't. That was the literal answer. You don't have to.
So if I don't have to accept your answer, then why is your answer even like meaningful?
Because it's meaningful to people who understand the context of the answer. So like if I give you a mathematical answer, what is the square root of something, and I give you an answer and you say, well, I don't accept that. Like you can reject the answer. But if you ask, well, why is your answer meaningful? It's meaningful.
Do you even have like the intellectual capacity to even track the conversation?
Like you're muted. All right. So to answer his question, if I give an answer to like why the laws of logic or why math works, or a mathematical answer, even if a moron doesn't accept that answer, it could still be meaningful to the experts in the field who do understand the context of the question. So if my answer fits to the context of the experts, even if a moron doesn't accept it, it's still a meaningful answer. Anybody else? Questions, comments, arguments for God?
Hey, T-Cam, how are you doing, bro? I wanted to ask you what your opinion on the Neoplatonic one is.
The Neoplatonic one, you said?
Right, yeah.
Well, so I reject Platonism. I think Neoplatonism is even sillier than Platonism. And the Neoplatonic one sounds like an argument for aseity or something, which is even more silly than Neoplatonism.
Wow, why is it silly, bro? Can you explain?
Sure.
I'm like really stupid, so you might have to kind of like dumb it down for me.
Sure. So Platonism is the idea that there are some kind of non-physical forms that are universal. The idea that there are universals has lots of logical problems to it. It doesn't really make sense. The fact that there are non-physical forms has no evidence. It's just a hypothetical, kind of like fairies or leprechauns.
Wait, can I just stop you for a second?
Sure.
Would you say if something lacks evidence, it therefore follows this thing is illogical, or are you just saying the belief is like
silly to believe in it if it has no evidence? So the silly part is there. It's not illogical. Like there's no logical contradiction with a Platonic object.
Oh, okay. So you wouldn't say there's going to be like a contradiction in these forms obtaining, but you wouldn't say there's any like motivation for this belief, essentially.
No evidence for it. There's lots of motivation for it. No evidence. So I'd say that like there's lots of things that don't have a logical contradiction that have no evidence. Santa Claus has no logical contradiction, but it would be silly to believe in it because it lacks evidence, and there's lots of other factors of the universe that would contradict the existence of Santa Claus. and it would make more sense if Santa Claus didn't exist. Similarly with Platonic objects and other arguments, it would make them silly for the same reasons, because there's no evidence for them, and there is better explanations that only use things that we do have evidence for to explain everything we need about the universe.
Yeah, but what do you like take a belief to mean?
Take a what?
What do you take a belief to mean? Like when you say like I believe in X, like what does that like?
Brain state?
What's that? Yeah, a brain state.
Yeah.
So just like some doxastic attitude, right?
Doxastic. I don't know what you mean by that, but no, just a brain state. A belief is a physical system in the brain that causes you to have a certain chemical reaction that associates to usually dopamine to cause you to say that this is a positive affirmation that you hold.
Okay. But what, all right, so like what do you take evidence to mean? Like if someone has evidence for a belief, like what do you know, like what does that mean to you?
Something that increases the probability of a proposition being true.
Okay. And so like what would be your what would be your criteria of like justification then? Like you would say like
Novel,
a belief is
testable
justified
prediction.
based on only Okay. Can you break that down for me? Like I said, like I'm really slow, bro.
So if you have
I'm
a
just trying to, like,
hypothesis,
track along.
say like leprechauns or God or the physical world exists or whatever, and you say, based on my hypothesis, I expect this to occur in the future. You do an experiment, confirm that whatever it is occurs, and you can do that consistently and reliably. That would be evidence of your hypothesis.
Okay. Yeah, see, like my friend Reed asked if he could be unmuted. He said he has like slight autism. So if that's possible, if that's logically possible, but
yeah.
Okay.
Which one is Reed?
I guess
Reed go?
I guess I would have one more question, right?
Sure.
So like, what would be your foundation for morality?
I think
Like,
it's
how would you go about
undiscovered
going-
law of physics.
Undiscovered law of physics. Wow. Could you explain what that means? Like,
Well, you know what a law of physics is, right? Like strong force, weak
well, I'm
force.
familiar. Well,
And undiscovered
you
just
said
means
it's
there's another one
undiscovered.
that we haven't discovered yet. That's just so it's undiscovered law of physics.
so your foundation for morality is some undiscovered like law of physics.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So that's what grounds like your like moral system essentially.
Yeah, that would be like the ontology. What is morality? I think it's an undiscovered law of physics.
So do we have epistemic access to that? Like, is that accessible? Or?
Nigga, T-shirts, shut your bitch ass up, oh ugly ass nigga, shut your little.
Yes, I would say that we do have epistemic access via the patterns in moral intuition and moral progress.
So it's just going to be like intuitively recognizable.
No.
You say
So
to the agent.
So
Okay.
like the patterns of moral intuition and moral progress is how moral intuitions change across time for different cultures, different
Right.
species. And so if the pattern of change in intuitions is the same or follows the same pattern across all species everywhere in the world, that would be indicative of something. And so if we can see this pattern and that there is a cause to this pattern, and that cause presumably is the undiscovered force of nature, then we would have epistemic access to discover this force by its influence on moral intuitions.
So you would say something. All right. So what is like going to be the thing causing these states? So you're saying the thing by which these things are caused is what we ground on, our morality in. Essentially.
Sort of. So
Itself, or?
So the thing that causes the pattern is like the law of physics, and so it's what grounds objective morality.
What would you mean
if
by
morality
objective?
was caused by evolution or something, that would be the cause of morality. Morality would just be evolutionary, and that would be subjective. I'd consider that a subjective morality. Objective would be it would be caused by something that exists more fundamentally, like gravity or strong force, weak force, some fundamental force of nature. Then it would be a thing that exists independent of any personal opinions or subjective states, making it an objective grounds of morality.
So you're just saying there's going to be like these stance-independent reasons, and those reasons are just going to be like some undiscovered laws.
Well, the
that are,
stance-independent
like,
reasons would be there is a law, that the law is morality or something.
The law is morality.
Yeah.
So all right. So this kind of mechanism that exists that causes these like patterns and like general like moral intuitions is going to be like some moral law.
Yep.
Essentially, is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Why would anyone take that to be the case?
Because if that's the hypothesis. So the hypothesis is if this law exists, then we would expect the consequence of in the future our moral intuitions would change to follow the same pattern that is predicted by this model. And then I make some predictions like I think that in the future AIs will also develop the same
If
pattern.
this pattern justifies child rape.
Wow.
That's sort of a
That
legit
was-
question. So the pattern doesn't. The pattern is any involuntary imposition of will is immoral. That is the pattern. So it would not do that.
Wait, so would you like say nature is like
Immoral. Yes.
essentially violating us?
Yes.
Like
100%.
so like so we exist in this causal chain, right? And we are caused by these kind of external forces.
Yep.
You would say nature is essentially
Immoral. Yep.
like imposed. But do you take nature to be like this kind of moral agent that like possesses volition and like
No. So
the ability
morality
to tolerate?
in my model is defined as things that are done to will, not by will. So you can do an immoral action like a rock can fall on someone, that would be immoral. And that is a prediction that my model makes, that in the future our moral intuitions will tend to see actions done to wills as what defines morality, not by wills. So rock's nature to be
Right.
immoral. That's one of the predictions. If that's right, if I get that correct, that would be evidence of my model.
Yeah, but what does it mean for the rock's nature to be immoral? That just seems unintelligible. Because like typically
Nature doesn't
we're
matter.
going
It's
to
supposed
say,
to
all right.
consequences. So
All right.
if you do something that imposes on someone's will, that's immoral. If a rock does something that imposes on someone's will, that's immoral. So it's not about the rock's nature. It's just about the consequences to wills.
Do you say that like hunger imposes upon
Yes, 100%.
Okay, so hunger is immoral.
Yep. Well, nature, which causes hunger, is immoral. Yes. Hunger isn't necessarily immoral.
Right.
You could consent to hunger, and then it wouldn't be immoral. The problem is that you're forced to experience hunger without your consent, and that's immoral.
So like you would say the best possible world is just going to be one in which like nothing in like simplicity just imposes on our will.
Yeah,
That
where
would be,
there's
like,
no
your-
involuntary imposition of will, where no one can be forced to do anything they don't consent to doing.
So we're just completely free from any outside force.
Sort of. Like you can't affect other agents. So like if you wanted to hurt someone else, unless they consented, you couldn't do it. So it's not like you are free to do anything you want. And you would essentially be given your own world that you could design however you wanted to. The only limitation would be is you can't force any other conscious agents to live there. All conscious agents would be given their own world. They could design however they want. And then you could set limitations for yourself if you wanted to, like playing a video game. You can set the difficulty to very hard. And so you can have tons of limitations. You could make a world exactly like this world that we currently live in. And as long as you consent to be there, it's perfectly fine. So the only limitation is that you're not forced to do anything you don't consent to doing. You can still have all the limitations you want, or even more limitations than what we have in this world.
Your I don't know, like your view is just like very obscure, right? It just seems like you're like analogically predicating these like ideas to like these like inanimate objects, right? Or at least like objects we wouldn't consider to have these kind of causal powers, right?
Right. That's,
like
that's
obviously
a prediction. So that's not an entailment of like the evidence of the model. That's something that if my model is correct, here's what we'd expect to see in the future. And to do those kinds of things, you need to make a prediction that no one else expects yet. And so the point of that is to be a novel prediction that is made by my model that no other models predict, which is how we would get evidence it's correct. So if we discover this is true, that would be good evidence of my model, because all of the other models of morality reject that. They think that it's going to be contingent on intention. And so the whole point of that statement is to make an individualization about my model that could indicate it true or false, to make it falsifiable by here's making a profound difference to what my model would expect to other models.
I have a question.
Sure.
Like, Okay, so like, do you know what modus ponens is?
That's the first of the, I forget what they're called. The
Can you reiterate it so I
Can I
can like
what?
understand it? So I have like can you reiterate it? What it is?
What do you mean reiterate it? P there for Q. P Q.
Okay, so I have a modus ponens argument for the existence of God. I want you to respond to it.
Okay.
Okay, so which premise do you reject? So under like minimal consistency theory, like under like Reidian epistemology, you would understand that if I think God exists, therefore God exists. No, if I
Okay. So modus ponens is if
wait
P,
one second. If I think God
stop.
exists.
Okay, so modus ponens is if P then Q. P therefore Q. So skip all of the other stuff in the middle. Start with P, and then show the argument so I can address it. So I need the argument. If P then Q, P therefore Q. So what is your P? What is the first?
Yeah, so I said if I think God exists, then God exists. I think God exists, therefore God exists. What premise do you reject?
So it's if then if X, if P then
yeah,
Q.
I don't
What is the if?
understand. Yeah, I'm saying if I think God exists, then God exists.
Okay.
I think God exists, therefore God exists.
So I'd reject premise one. I don't think that if you think
Okay, let's
something
talk
is
about
true,
premise one then. So under Reidian epistemology
I don't care
and
about
minimal
Reidian
consistency
epistemology.
theory. No, you have to understand
No, I
that
don't.
this is going to be
No,
this is going to be an axiom, just like how you asserted
What?
the three laws of logic, even though they're not necessarily truth. You just asserted the claim. When I asked you
No,
to
no.
like, what's the contradiction? And like,
So you asked, why do I reject your argument? I reject the first premise. Because you think something is true does not mean it's true. I can give you an example. I think there is $1 billion in my bank account. I look at my phone. Nope, no $1 billion in my bank account. That epistemology doesn't work. Therefore, your argument fails.
wait, this is going to be too quick on your part. You're basically saying that
That's
you're
not
dismissing my argument. No. Can I teach you like basic philosophy, please?
No. Anybody else have any questions?
Hello, T Jump Sir.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right.
Yeah. I was just wondering, what do you think of David Hume's critique against concrete miracles?
I disagree with David Hume, because David Hume, part of what he says is correct. The part that he says that natural explanations would always be more likely, that makes sense. But I don't think you should always. I don't think, because his epistemology makes it impossible to justify miracle claims, and I think that's wrong. I think that there are ways to justify evidence and belief in miracle claims. So I disagree with Hume.
T Jump Habibi, it's Rob.
Anyways, yeah, could you elaborate more on that? Like, I understand when, like, so basically he would assert that it's epistemically impossible for concrete miracles to occur, right? And essentially,
so right, I disagree.
What? You would disagree that they're epistemically impossible?
Yes.
Okay.
So like,
yeah, because I know his reasoning. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think that, like, God could have set the universe up such that some event would happen that would be very fortuitous, like, I don't know, Jesus winning the lottery or something. And he could have set that up as purely a physical system within the universe. So it was designed, the universe was designed to make that outcome. So it was this necessary outcome of the physical laws of the universe. And so that could still be considered a physical miracle.
Yeah.
And
I don't think Hume would negate that. Like, he would accept that. He would say, well, in fact, there's even a possible world where,
right.
Like,
the question is
someone
could
literally
you epistemically justify belief that it was a miracle? The answer is yes. Yes, you can.
Yeah, like he would just say it's epistemically impossible, mainly due to the fact that induction is dependent on the uniformity principle of nature, and obviously, by depending on how you define a miraculous event, that's going to violate such. So if it violates such, then it's inductively impossible.
Well, that wouldn't make any sense,
So
because
it can't be
the problem of induction has nothing to do with epistemic justification. There, it's just irrelevant.
Well, I mean, I'm saying that's just how, like, under like a Humean perspective, that's essentially how he would define induction to be.
No,
that's what I'm saying.
no, it wouldn't, because that would just invalidate all knowledge. Because so the problem of induction is a problem of grounding knowledge, but it doesn't invalidate knowledge. So you can still have inductive justification for belief in miracles just fine. That was the very first thing I said. So, like, if say you believe in a God existing, you say this God will give me a gold brick every time I pray. You pray, a gold brick appears in front of you. That would be evidence of your God. Now it could be just, I don't know, the universe being random or something, and induction being wrong.
Well, yeah,
but it doesn't make a
it's only
difference. It would still
probable.
be evidence. It would still be evidence of your conclusion. It's more likely.
I mean, yeah, but that wouldn't be engaging with his definition, because that would just be a natural explanation. So it's what conforms with the uniformity principle. what David Hume is going to say, and as William Waterbrook says in his book, he takes induction to simply just be dependent on the uniformity principle, obviously independent of rationale.
Yeah, that's wrong. Again, you can use induction when there is no
Yeah,
uniformity.
I know. I'm just saying this is a Humean perspective, and you
Right,
said
I
that's not exactly
yes,
what Hume
I said I
says. But
disagree. All of that's wrong. None of that matters. So it's completely irrelevant.
okay, so you're saying you just disagree with it, like just generally, just not in a Humean perspective.
I have no idea. Like I disagree with Hume's version of that, which is not relevant
Okay.
to any specific topic.
Okay, I thought you said Hume didn't say that or something.
What?
Yeah. I thought you said something else. I thought you said like Hume never said that or something.
No, Hume implied that miracles or justification and belief in miracles was impossible. I disagree.
Yeah, I know. Okay, I just wanted to ask that question on like your thoughts on that. I'm not gonna like go too in depth, but yeah. Thank you for your answers. Then.
Yep.
I have a question. Jump.
Sure.
What would be your objection against hylomorphism?
No idea.
So you don't have the intellectual capacity to even understand like what I'm talking about?
Like, I do have the intellectual capacity to understand what you're talking about, but you didn't bring up an argument.
So you don't have the intellectual capacity or faculties to even track the conversation. So look, I'm gonna
goodbye.
I don't understand what goes on in your mind.
Do you have an actual question? Anybody have an actual question? Mute. Do we have any questions, arguments for morality? God? Is there an objective morality in Islam? That was an interesting question. I'm interested to know the answer to.
The answer is no.
Depends on who you ask. There's some sects who believe in it, some sects do not. But I would say that the majority of Muslims believe in it.
Yeah, so T-John, what would you define objective morality to be?
Stands independent moral truths.
Right. Yeah, that's unintelligible. What's your
wait? What you said? That was
what's your thoughts on
unintelligible?
like?
So stance independent
what-
means
what-
something that's true, independent of any opinion, feeling.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying the general idea of it is just like unintelligible. Just
How
in
is
this,
that
the very well, in the very same way that you critique the Platonists, right, for believing in these kind of mind-independent forms.
Well,
I mean,
those aren't unintelligible.
really
Those are
take it-
clearly intelligible. They don't entail a logical contradiction. I don't believe they're true.
Right.
But you said it's unintelligible, which means
probably assume you're using like proprietary language here. Like when someone says something is unintelligible, do you take that to mean it's like non-propositional, as in it's not expressing in anything like true fact? And
no,
like,
more
what do
like
you
it
take on
entails a
intelligible
logical
to mean?
contradiction. So it's unintelligible if
Right.
it's either entails a logical contradiction or doesn't have a coherent sentence, like colorless green dreams, sleep furiously. That would be unintelligible. But in your context, I think it would be
Right.
more like a round square or a married bachelor. That's unintelligible. It can't be imagined.
A married bachelor is unintelligible?
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, I think your language is probably proprietary because,
no,
generally,
it's very standard
do-
in philosophy.
do
So if
you-
you think that you don't know
Yeah.
the language, but yes, that would be a married bachelor is unintelligible. You literally can't imagine a man who is both married and also not married at the same time. It's not. You can't cognate it in your brain, which means by definition it's
What's the argument for that?
unintelligible.
Yeah, like what's the argument that we can't like cognize that in our brain?
Because it's not possible to. It's A is both A and not A at the same time. Your brain does not function in a way. where
Yeah,
you
what's
can
the
coherently do
argument
that.
for classical logic? Yeah, like why would I assume classical logic to be the case?
And that's just how brains operate. Whether it's the case or not doesn't make a difference. It's how brains operate.
Yeah, what's the argument that? Yeah, what's the argument that's how brain operates?
It's the consensus in neurology, biology, cognitive science, philosophy of the mind, all of them.
Do you have do you have like epistemic access to like all brain states to like ground
You
that
can take
claim?
that up with the consensus of experts. If you reject that, I can't help you.
Yeah, but like, can you prove like other
I
minds
don't need
exist?
to. Like,
mean,
that's
we're
so
doing a lot
like
of
asking
things
if the
here.
sky is blue.
Yeah,
There are
sorry.
some facts that are just so obviously true. If you reject them, it's just pedantic and you're wasting everybody's time. So if you want, you could go debate that with the philosophers and they can crush you. But I don't need to waste
I
my
don't
time
know.
with it. So,
Yeah,
do you have a-
I mean, like, what would you say?
I've already addressed that. I've
What-
solved the topic.
yeah.
Like, if you want to do super pedantic things,
Okay.
go bother the philosophers who can crush you. I have no interest in super pedantic things that don't make any progress on any intellectual field whatsoever.
Oh, okay. So wait, so you believe these stance-independent reasons exist? What do you take reasons to be, T-Jump?
Reasons can be anything. You like it as a reason.
No, I'm asking. All right, so if you say something is a reason if and only if, and then you provide like the biconditional for that, so you can provide
A
like the
reason is any
certain
motivation.
condition.
Reason is, again, not a relevant factor here. That's why I said in the beginning, reason, stance-independent reasons don't matter. It's stance-independent facts that matter.
All right, so what do you take a fact to be?
Something that corresponds to reality.
Okay. And so, do you just use facts and reasons interchangeably, or are you saying
again,
that
reasons is
what you're
anything that
presenting?
motivates.
Right.
So you can have motivations that are
Anything
just,
that motivates, right?
can be a certain set of facts motivate, but not all facts motivate. All facts are correspondent to reality, whether or not they motivate. So reasons are things that motivate.
Right.
Facts are just anything that's true about reality.
I have a question.
Sure. What's your question?
All right.
So, like, what would be the contradiction in rejecting your answer?
What answer?
The answer that you gave.
Which answer?
The answer that you're giving to Johan. You said, like, go talk to the philosophers. They can crush you on that. Aren't you a philosopher?
Sure.
Yeah, so if you're going to say the philosophers are going to crush him on it, and you're a philosopher, therefore you can crush him. Why don't you crush him?
For the answer I gave, for the reason I gave. Like, I have no interest in pedantic things that
you-
we don't have any progress in the intellectual field. So if you want to talk
I don't
pedantic,
understand why you're stuttering, but I guess
next. Anybody else?
So T-Jump, when I asked you to define like objective morality,
Yeah.
Did you not say stance-independent
Moral truths.
reasons or like
No,
stance-independent
moral
truths? Right. Okay. Sure. All right. And what would be the truth maker to these moral truths? Right. So you have all of
Correspondence to
these.
reality.
Oh, well, yeah. So so that which makes these like moral truths true is just going to be that they correspond to reality.
Yeah.
That's what makes them
That's
true.
what makes everything true.
Right. Right. But okay, so there's going to be like, I think there's some confusion going on. Right now, like if you say something is true if and only if it corresponds to reality, sure, that's just trivial. But if you say, oh, okay, I don't know, T-Jump likes ice cream, right? That proposition is made true by your preferences. The thing which makes it true is your preference towards ice cream.
Right.
Right. So I'm asking you, okay, so you have the set of all moral propositions under this view, right, whatever they may be, and I'm asking you what makes them true. I'm not asking
Correspondence
if they
to
are
the
true.
moral field. So there's like a undiscovered law of physics I mentioned earlier, and what makes this sentence, a particular moral sentence, true is if it corresponds to the moral field, and that would be the answer.
Can you just define what the moral field is going to be in this context, please, sir?
Undiscovered law of physics. It's like any other field, like
Right,
an
but
actual field.
if it's undiscovered, how do we make a claim to this as a foundation to this kind of like moral system you've devised? Right? It doesn't. I mean, it seems like heavily
like
undetermined.
whether or not it's discovered doesn't make a difference to a hypothesis. All hypotheses are undiscovered first. They start undiscovered. That's how hypotheses work.
Right. Right, but you're advancing this view such that you can, like you can ground your morals, right? Now, if someone asks T-Jump, how do you ground your morality? And you say, oh, I don't know, I've got like this undiscovered moral field.
Right. So I don't
or, like, this
understand what your
undiscovered
objection
law.
here is, because it's like, this is just basic how hypotheses work. So if you ask Einstein, how do you ground physics? He's going to say, well, I think it's curvature of space-time. And prior to his experiments, he's going, yeah, it's undiscovered. That's still how I ground it. So simply saying whether or not you've discovered it or whether or not it's discoverable is just irrelevant. Like, you can ground hypotheses before discovering them in your hypothesis just fine.
Right. That's not the contention, though. They're advancing theories, right? And then I take it that like you're going to have theories, hypotheses, sure, and then that's fine, right, within the field of science.
Well,
but like
it's
when
fine
it
in
comes
any
to
field.
meta,
Like, you can make a hypothesis for
Right.
anything. That's perfectly fine.
Sure, yeah, you could, right? But in terms of like meta ethics and how we're grounding morality, right, the question is going to be like what, essentially it's all right. Wait, this person wants to go ahead.
I have a question. It's regarding epistemology.
Sure.
Regarding language influence our understanding and communication of knowledge, can we have thoughts or knowledge that are not expressible in language?
Yes.
So if it's going to be like linguistic tokens, I have another question regarding what's the epistemic status of mathematical and logical truths.
Say that again very slower.
If you don't have intellectual capacity to conduct the conversation and understand what I'm saying, then
Could
it's
you
okay.
talk slower?
I'll repeat what I'm saying. I understand I need to talk slower for you to understand, but I'll slow it down for you and simplify the words for you. So, how do we come to know mathematical and logical truths? Are they discovered or invented? What is your ontological status?
I would guess.
No, I did ask for a guess. I asked for an answer.
Well, so the problem, if you're just uneducated in philosophy, which I'm assuming you are, the answer is we
I am
don't
not
know.
uneducated.
So the answer is we don't know. That's an unsolved problem in philosophy. We don't know if it's invented or discovered. So just because if you're uneducated in philosophy, don't try to sound like you actually know philosophy, because you don't. It just makes you sound dumb. Whether or not math was invented or discovered is an ongoing debate in philosophy. There isn't an answer, and so the correct intellectual answer is you don't know. You make a guess. Anybody else?
Wait.
And what's the moral framework that you have adopted?
Well, my view is a version of moral naturalism, but it's my own view, one that I invented, that says that any involuntary imposition of will is immoral. And so the perfect moral world would be one where it would be impossible to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to doing.
Right. So kind of a harm principle structure?
No, because harm, it's consent based. So like if you consent to being harmed, then harm is perfectly moral. So it's not based on harm, it's based on consent.
Okay. And then just go ahead.
So teacher, would you consider your parents immoral for bringing you into the world?
No, because in this model, the parents didn't do anything. It would be biology that did. So biology is immoral, 100%. Parents, not necessarily, because parents don't actually have any control over your consciousness. They didn't like build your consciousness or take your consciousness out of like the ether and put it in a body. All they did was certain biological things, which then led to your consciousness.
Right, but you didn't consent.
Correct.
You didn't
correct.
consent.
But the
to being
immoral
born,
actor
right?
wasn't your parents, it was biology. So I agree that there was an immoral action that took place, but it wasn't your parents who did it, it was biology who did it.
Yeah, I got a question, man. I'm from Old Blood. I'm interested in philosophy, right? I got a question, like philosophy. Can you prove that God exists?
I'm an atheist, so I would say no.
All right, so like, present like why you believe that God doesn't exist, man?
Because the facts of reality indicate that God does not exist in the same way they indicate Santa Claus does not exist.
All right, prove to me that your perception of reality is going to be identical to reality.
It's not. Why would it need to be?
Yeah. So why would you trust something that's going to be distinct from reality?
That is incoherent. Like it seems like you're
Yeah,
arguing
I
that
understand it's going to be incoherent. Yeah, type shit.
it's like so
yeah,
you don't need 100% correspondence to reality to make judgments. So like say my
So you're taking a guess. You do qiyas.
No. So you can have knowledge without certainty. You don't need certainty for knowledge. So like if you have a compass that points sort of north, like say it points north 10% of the time, then using the compass, you would never be rational to conclude it was pointing south because it points every other direction the same percentage of times, random chance. So if you have some percent chance that it's pointing north and everywhere else is just random, you could be justified in the conclusion it's pointing north, but never justified in the conclusion it's pointing south. So in the same way, we could be justified in concluding there is a natural physical world, but never justified in concluding there is a God.
Yeah. So I have another question. So like, what's your response to like the Pascal wager?
Pascal's wager?
I've looked into. Yeah.
So Pascal's wager says that.
Like in my hood, like we don't talk over each other, type shit. So.
Would you not done with the question?
Nah.
Okay. So is there more to the question? How do I respond to Pascal's wager?
Yeah. So like, like Grant Abbey, I met him in like P&I, and like we talked about this. He like ran away from me, like how I ran away from the cops.
Was there more to the question? What's the actual question?
Yeah, type shit. I got another question. Like Pascal wager.
Sorry, like
So the question was, how do I respond to Pascal's wager? So let me answer that one first, then you can go to your next question.
Yeah, that's it.
So Pascal's wager is the position that if you believe in God and die, you go to heaven. If you don't believe in God and die, you either get nothingness or hell. And so the options are nothingness. If you believe in God and he doesn't exist, you go to nothingness. If you believe in God, he does exist. you
Can
go
I
to heaven.
interrupt?
No.
No. I ask you to like explain the argument. I asked you, like.
So the argument is that if you believe in God and he exists, you get an infinite reward, heaven. If you believe in God and he doesn't exist, you get nothingness. If you don't believe in God and he does exist, you either get nothingness or hell. And if you don't believe in God and he does exist, you get hell. So the problem with this argument is that there is an equally probable chance of going to heaven if there is no God, and that is excluded from the argument. So the real probabilities of the argument would be if you don't believe in God and there is no God, you could still go to heaven. There's still a possibility of a natural heaven without God. And so if you include that possibility in the argument, then the probabilities come out to be exactly the same. There's no probability favor for belief in a God because your chances of getting infinite reward are exactly the same under the belief and non-belief systems. So that is my objection to Pascal's wager, because it rejects or doesn't include the possibility of a heaven without a God, which has equally as evidential support, is equally as likely as heaven with a God. You have another question?
Can I ask
Hey, T-Jump.
Yeah,
T-Jump.
I just want to quickly say it's Sentinel, and I like your title. I would argue that Leibniz's best of all possible worlds fits the Christian worldview, but we can discuss that another time.
No, that's absolutely right. So I did steal the name from Leibniz's best of all possible worlds, and his definition describes this world as the best of all possible worlds, which I think is wrong, which is why I'm hijacking the name, because I think that my definition
Yeah. No, but it's cool, bro. It's all good.
Thanks.
We should have a chat outside a Muslim discussion Discord place.
Sure, I do live streams usually every Sunday or once a month on Sundays on my Discord, discord.gg/tjump.
Sweet.
Yeah, but like,
T-Jump.
Yeah, go on.
No, go ahead, son.
I did have a question for Mr. T-Jump.
Sure.
It's more so a political question, because I did watch your debate. I think it was, if I recall correctly, I think it was Aaron Ra, the idea of having religion or religiosity in general within society. Like, do you think, like, in a specific society, that religion would aid in the structure of the society into making it better, or do you think it's more so just merely like a social condition that's just getting overruled?
Well, it depends on the religion, but yes, religion has been predominantly used to aid in the structure of the society. At the time it was introduced, usually religions are at the highest end of the most useful ideologies at the time, and so they are used to benefit the structure of a society for long periods of time.
Actually, I'll be wrong. My name is Daniel. So I have a question like regarding your like moral realism. Can you answer it?
Sure.
Yeah. So like when you say it stands independent, what does that mean?
It means it exists independent of any positions of a brain state.
Oh, without brains, would it still depend on brains?
So it doesn't depend on brains whether or not there are brains. So if there were no brains, it would still exist, and if there are brains, it would still exist.
Oh, you use a brain to conclude that you don't need a brain for it to be without a brain?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. We use our brains to discover things about the world that exist independent of our brains, like rocks, the moon, stars. It's very easy. We do this all the time. There are things that exist that are not a part of our brains, and we use our brains to discover that there are those things that are not a part of our brains. It's called science.
That's a lot of brains.
A lot of brains.
Regarding science, though, you need a brain for science to be applicable onto our brain.
That is not a coherent question. So no, machines can do science. There are actually several machines that
What do you
do
mean?
science.
What's the argument for that?
Well, there are
What's the
actual
argument for why
machines
it's going to
that
be incoherent?
do actual science that don't have brains.
You need science for you to cohere with reality.
That's the best way to justify coherence with reality. There might be other ways.
Are you trolling me?
Nope.
What the shit?
Anybody else? Questions, comments?
I was going to say, what the signal?
So T-Jump, when I was asking you the question about, whether it would be immoral that your parents, conceived you, that biology would be the thing in this context that, commit this kind of immoral act.
Yep.
When you say you committed this immoral act, are you saying this in a sense by which, like, biology itself has these kind of intentional states?
No, again, so
to
as I
perform
mentioned earlier,
a moral
my
act?
definition of morality does not require intentional states. It's any action that occurs to a conscious agent that is immoral, regardless of intention. So intention doesn't matter to morality in my model. If a rock falls on you, that's immoral in my model.
Okay, right, I've got you. So, moral agency isn't restricted to some rational mind that is capable of
Correct.
deliberating. And okay, sure. And so that's why, for example, if T-Jump was walking through the woods and a tree fell on you, that would be immoral.
Yep.
On the behalf of the tree, essentially.
Yeah, nature or reality, but yeah.
Right. And you consider yourself like a moral realist under your view?
Yep.
Right. And when you say there are these stance-independent reasons which are connected to this kind of moral field,
Facts.
would you say these
Facts.
reasons? Yeah, sure. Stance-independent facts. Would you say these are going to be like concrete or abstract?
Concrete.
Concrete. And by concrete, do you mean they're causally efficacious? They can be acted upon, and they're
They
capable of acting
cause
like
things. So by concrete, I mean that it's a law of physics, just like gravity or the strong force or the weak force. It's an actually existing thing that can be described with sentences and propositions. And so the actually existing thing is a concrete physical field. It actually exists.
And then this concrete physical field goes on to ground and cause these things to be the case, and such would imply like this moral system.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, like my name is number one, boy, type shit. I got another question about philosophy.
Wait, can I just clarify something with T-Jump?
Sure.
When you spoke about like the tree falling on you. So, for example, just like a random example, like in the Kuiper belt, when you have, say, collisions of certain rocky bodies, are there any sort of immoral things going on there?
No, those would be amoral, because immoral would be defined as involuntary impositions of will, and so it has to affect a will or a conscious agent for it to be immoral.
Yeah.
So conscious agent in this sense is then what defines morality versus amoral, situations.
Yeah, so if it affects a conscious agent in a way that it wants, that would be moral. So like voluntary assistance of will is morality, involuntary imposition of will is immorality, and then everything else is amoral.
But then who's doing the immoral thing? So for example, you said yes to the tree. So if the tree falls on you by happenstance, and in that sense it's pure happenstance, it's you still put in other words, it's the tree's fault that did it.
You're the universe in this case. So it would be the laws of physics that are imposed on you without your consent. The universe would be immoral, and the universe then causes things like the tree to fall without your consent.
But then aren't you, because I mean, you and I both hold to evolution, right? So like, putting consciousness aside, aren't we all stardust anyway, and we're just a product of the dark energy parameters, and like, the whole universe in itself being a closed system, and if things bump into each other, well, that's just part of the system within itself, like affecting itself, and that's just how the system works.
Sure, but so
yeah,
can still be immoral. So like the fact that the system works in a particular way doesn't mean that the way the system works is moral. It would be a naturalistic fallacy. So yes, there could be like a law of morality, say, and that law is weaker than the law of the strong and weak forces, and so the strong and the weak forces can cause interactions that would override the moral force, and so it can do many immoral things, just like we can use some forces to override other forces. Like gravity is pretty weak, we can use the strong and weak forces to build rockets to launch us away.
Right,
or throw gravity.
right.
So even though there could be a
Right.
moral force, there could be other forces that override that. Yes.
Wait, just this is interesting. I just want to carry this thought forward, please.
Sure.
Like whoever's bumping in.
Can I like ask one question? I've been looking
Oh
at
my
it.
gosh.
Okay, let him ask one question.
Positive
He will be very short. What is your question?
Yeah, T-Jump. You got a negative cantal tilt and positive cantal tilt. You looked, Max.
Okay, so what was go ahead, Han Solo.
All right.
Answer his question.
I didn't even understand.
Anyway, so I mean, your thought process is interesting. Like I think you're familiar with me, right? Like I'm a Christian and I run Sentinel on YouTube.
No idea.
Oh, well, okay. You and I like I'm good friends with Hugh Ross. Like I've seen you have Hugh Ross a few times, and
cool.
Anyway,
what's your YouTube channel?
Sentinel Apologetics.
Ah, yes.
Like
I think we've had a conversation, haven't we?
Yeah. We've had run-ins with, way back in the what was it called? The Great Community Debate or something?
Yeah, Great Debate Community.
Like the Google Plus, the Great Debate Community. That's right. Anyway, it's been a while. So it's
Great Debate
Google
Community.
Plus, the Great Debate Community. That's right. All right.
That was Echo from. I think it was the HHH guy.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Anyway, so coming back to this, so if a meteorite like by pure happenstance, smacks into you, or a tree smacks into you, and then you're adding this morality stuff to it, you can't then turn around to the tree or the meteorite, hey, you hit me, how dare you? Because that in itself, like I can't see how that would make sense, because that's just the universe, right?
I don't really understand the point of your question. Like we literally do that. Like when you stub your toe, you yell at the table, stupid table. Like we literally do that. But I don't see why whether or not we could do that is relevant to the truth of the matter of what's morality.
I suppose applying a morality label to that event, like so for example, Kuiper Bell objects smacking each other, amoral.
Right.
Because that's just what they are. But if a tree or a meteorite hits you, it's your consciousness. So in other words, the very fact that you're conscious, like ergo, you then place this label onto the chaosness of reality, I suppose, and then you define that event as affecting you to be immoral versus two asteroids bumping each other as amoral because it doesn't affect you.
Right. So like since, as I've said, I think this is like an undiscovered law of physics. So you can imagine a field, and the field has fluctuations, and the fluctuations can occur only at conscious agents and not at not conscious agents. And so if something interacts with a conscious agent, it would be affecting this field, while two rocks bumping into each other without conscious agents would not affect this field. And so if the field is what defines morality, and fluctuations in this field are only affected by consciousness, then if a tree falls on the conscious agent, it would affect the field and it would be moral or immoral. And if a tree falls and doesn't affect a conscious agent, it would not affect this field, and so it would not be moral or immoral.
Right. And in this model of yours, it all boils down to consciousness. Like in other words, consciousness is the basal layer for define, like the consciousness itself or the conscious agent is the one that then dictates with respect to the system that he's within. This is amoral, that's immoral, that's moral, like,
Well, the conscious agent is just in the system. It doesn't define the system at all. So like what defines what's immoral or not is the field itself. And then we can understand what the field is, how the field is fluctuating by looking at our intentional states or whatever. But we don't determine what is or isn't immoral.
What is this? What is this? In Africa, we do not learn this. What is this? Philosophy? We do not learn this in Africa.
Oh my gosh.
Please teach me this philosophy.
If this is the best that Muslims can do in regards to decorum, like, guys, come on.
It's kind of funny because they're in Africa, most Muslims.
That's why. Anyway, I won't go there. Anyway, so but you're an atheist, though.
Yep.
So this, this is interesting. Like, because I'm a big fan of Leibniz. In fact, it's his model, the best of all possible worlds, that I've carefully thought about in regards to, say, the Christian context, the Christian worldview, and I think you have huge respect for someone like, say, Hugh Ross, who has not only sticks with mainstream science, but tries to wrestle with a marriage, so to speak, of this system of things, and like a god who then incarnates and all that. But so yeah, and in regards to a meteorite, okay, so to flip it around, like for me as a Christian, if a tree were to fall on me, I would argue that it's not immoral. It's just that is just the result of a domino effect with respect to what the ancients called a chaos kampf, like a struggle with chaos. There's chaosness in the world, there's entropy, thermodynamics, and ultimately death. What we would consider death. So what then kind of intrigues me is that my consciousness, which obviously is nothing but brain states, right? Putting aside the so-called soul consciousness part, the so-called immaterial psychon part of the brain, the substance dualism stuff, right? So putting that aside, if I just go down the naturalistic route, I find it curious that we are still able to be like a bird on a branch, sort of like looking from high above, looking down on the chaosness of this reality, like as if we, to use Leibniz's term, well, mini logoses, we're mini like divine consciousness, just observing the non-livable things of reality doing its thing.
Well, so to respond to the first part of your argument about how you see the tree falling, the point of this saying that a tree falling on you is immoral is a prediction of what my model would entail. If my model is correct, as our moral intuitions and moral progress continues, we will begin to see trees falling on people as immoral. That's the prediction that my model makes. So if my model is correct, here's what we would expect in the future. So it grants that currently most people see things as moral as contingent on intentional states of agents, intentional actions of agents, or whatever. And the point of saying,
that's the key word, right? Intentional. That would be the key word in that sense. It's
right.
Intentional.
And so the point of me saying that rocks falling on people is immoral is a prediction about, if I'm right, how morality is going to progress. And so it's a prediction of something that we don't see, don't expect yet, which makes it novel. So the whole point of this is to say, here is something that my model does that is unique to my model that no other model does. And if this happens to be the case in the future, that would be evidence my model is correct. So it's not expecting you to agree with it now. It's saying this is something that my model predicts in the future.
Right. And then, so someone like Hugh, or anyone who argues, like in the hyper sense, like the hyper anthropoid principle, the whole fine-tuning stuff. How does your model accommodate the possibility that the tree falling could be part of the so-called fine-tuning parameters? In other words, the tree happens to fall not by sheer dumb luck, but ironically for a larger good. The whole butterfly effect, like stuff like that. That there's a greater good down the track, which then you couldn't say it's immoral.
Well, it'd still be immoral. So even if you do a bad thing for a greater good thing, it's still immoral. So doing one bad thing, say kill one to save 5, killing the one is an immoral action you've done to do 5 moral actions, save 5 people. But saving 5 people doesn't make that one action also good by extension. It's still a bad thing you've done. So the way my model says that morality works is that if you do a bad thing to achieve a good thing, no matter how good it is, you've still done a bad thing. It doesn't stop being bad. It's still immoral the entire
time. Yeah, true. Yeah. What's interesting is that because I was an atheist, and your model is very similar to the one I had. All I did was tack on a God part to it, but it's a God who descends down and also has a tree fall on him, so to speak. Like the whole crucifixion thing. So
seems to cause a whole
Yeah.
bunch of problems. Like, why would you
All right,
use
I'm
God thing?
I'm open to
And-
hear why. Like,
well,
go for
so the God thing, presumably the God is all powerful, and yet did some of these bad things for unknown good reasons, like you mentioned. The problem with that is that if my model is correct, doing a bad thing when you don't need to is immoral. So say like there's a doctor in the 1800s. Doctor in the 1800s is treating you because you have a gunshot wound. Best he can do is cut your leg off to try and stop infection, to make sure you don't die. He just cuts your leg off. Now, that's a bad thing. You didn't want your leg cut off, so it was a bad thing, but it was the best the doctor could do given his means, given his level of power. Now, if we fast forward and look at it from the perspective of today, like a modern doctor, you get shot in the leg, you go to a modern doctor. If the modern doctor decided to cut your leg off, he would be immoral. You would like sue him for malpractice, because modern doctors have antibacterial. So we can just give you a shot of antibacterial, you won't get an infection, you won't die. There's no justification to cut your leg off. It's gratuitous suffering. And so the more power someone has, the higher a standard we hold them to the actions they could do. So if there's an all-powerful being who can do all logically possible things, and he chooses to do things to us that we didn't consent to get some unknown good, well, that would be evil, because there's a logically possible way to gain that good without doing the bad thing. So for example, if there was an all-powerful God, he could have created a world where it was impossible to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to doing. And then he could have created his little side world of Earth and say, hey, would you guys like to be in this? Yes or no? If you opt out, that's great. You can go to your own world. And the fact that he didn't do that shows he's immoral. The fact that we were forced to be here without our consent is an immoral imposition on us that was avoidable given the level of power that God has.
Right. Now, are you familiar with well, I suppose the more orthodox and early Christian concepts of theosis?
Maybe. What are they?
Like a form of glorification, like at the Athanasian Creed, God became man so man can become divine through that. Like Philippians 2, the Carmen Christi, although he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, became a slave, a human.
Well, that would be another problem. Like, it's completely unnecessary. There's like no purpose to that whatsoever. Like, he literally could have just snapped his fingers and solved the problem. There's no point of sending himself to sacrifice himself to himself. He could have just snapped his fingers, poof, done. It's over.
Yeah, but do you see? So T-Jump, that snapping the finger stuff. Like, by the way, this is no offense to you. This is sort of like my knee-jerk reaction against, say, the young Earth creationist type, who obviously, in the context of what we understand in evolution, they just. In fact, even Muslims say the same thing. Like when Adam is created, the Quran says "be" and it is. Like it's just a snapping of the finger, and boom, there he is. So when I look at the universe, right, and especially astronomers like Heros, when we look at the size, the grandness, the age, it is a wonderful, beautiful, very ancient, very old and big story, right? And the tape of evolution, all of that is just absolutely fascinating. So then I tack on Leibniz and his proposition, that this is the best of all possible worlds, in the sense that it brings about this variety. And that, so he argued that if he is truly an omni-being, then to create something like himself is in itself a paradox and a contradiction. Like, in other words...
Did you disconnect? What happened?
Wait. Can you hear me? Am I disconnected?
You said in other words and then
Hello?
stopped. Can you hear me?
Hello.
I think he must have disconnected.
Hello.
Can anybody else?
Hello.
Can anybody else hear me in the chat?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Han Solo and Reed are both talking. I'm not sure if you can hear them.
I can hear Han. He was just saying hello, and that was it.
Okay.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you guys hear Han Solo?
Yeah. Hello.
can, yeah.
Can you hear me?
No.
Do you have 1 second, Reed? Do you have Reed muted like from your end, T-Jump?
Yep.
Nope.
Okay, that makes sense. He's trying to talk, and
That
but
sounds
yeah,
unfortunate.
Han Solo's talking.
Is my internet? Am I breaking up or something?
No, you're not.
Can you like
Nope.
message him and
Nope.
tell
Nope.
him that he can't hear us?
You can.
No, we can hear him.
T-Jump,
but
what do you think of
he-
Pat?
No,
we
he
can hear
can't
Pat.
hear us. He can't hear us. That's the problem. Can you message him and tell him that he can't hear us?
Oh.
Oh,
A new problem. Nope.
All right, T-Jump, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Nope.
Can you hear us?
No.
Nope.
Yes, I can hear
Okay.
you. Can you
So
hear me?
Pat.
All right.
Nope.
All right.
So
Okay, what was the last thing you heard me say? Because I was
Um,
hearing the whole thing. I don't know what that was about.
oh, okay. So you were talking about how God has to do things that are needlessly complex, like sending himself to sacrifice himself to do something.
Right. Did
rather
he
than
hear
snapping
the
his
bit?
fingers.
Did he hear the bit where I went into? Then I transferred into Leibniz's proposition, the best of all possible worlds, and why he proposed that. Like, did he hear me say that, or did it block out?
I think so. I didn't understand why you think God must act in these very meticulously complicated ways rather than snapping his fingers. I did not hear a reason to think that was.
Oh, okay. Then I'll start. I'll continue from there. Okay, so like and I think you heard me speak about young creationists and Muslims saying be it and it is.
Sure.
Yes. Okay. So from that trajectory, right, and then I think you heard me speak about, since I hold to evolution, in the mainstream sense, the grandness, the size, the age, all of it is beautiful. So, when I'm reading Leibniz, he argues that here you have an omni-being, and he it's interesting the way he was thinking about this. An omni-being cannot create anything like him, because that in itself is a contradiction. If he were to do so, so in other words, imagine if I'm going to use the term Yahweh. So Yahweh creates a Yahweh. Like that in itself is contradictory because. Why are the people over talking us?
No idea.
Anyway, so because if just going by the argumentation, right, the axioms here. So if Yahweh is an omni-being, then it's like saying Yahweh creates another omni thing, but then that word creating an omni thing in itself is just that doesn't make sense.
C'est quoi la lettre de la présentation?
So then,
well, first, I don't see a contradiction there at all. Like an omni being can create another omni being, and it just exists in another dimension or whatever. That's perfectly fine. There's no contradiction there to say that there's two omni beings. It's perfectly fine to have multiple omni beings. So that's an arbitrary constraint. Like, yes, obviously one wouldn't have power over another, but that wouldn't make it any less of an omni being in respect to the figment of reality. So if one being just creates another being of equal power to itself, and they wouldn't have power over one another, that's perfectly fine. There's no contradiction there. It could still be an omni being in respect to everything else. There's no logical contradiction with it stopping being able to control literally everything in the universe because it creates an alternative of itself that it doesn't have power over. It would still be equivalently as much God.
Yeah, but Leibniz's point goes back a step, that if we go with the proposition that God is uncreated, then it's in other words, God creates an uncreated God. That in that context doesn't make sense. So
that part's irrelevant. So again, all it needs to do is create another being of equal power to itself. It could be a created being of equal power, but the level of power it has and whether or not it was created are separate, irrelevant topics. So like there could be a God who's uncreated, and then he creates another being of equal power to itself that it doesn't have control over. One of them is created, one of them isn't. There's no logical contradiction. That's perfectly coherent system of the way things could be. There's no problem there.
Yeah, but you know how for example, young creationists or even flat earthers, when they argue for hypotheticals that are not really grounded in reality anyway, but they still argue for some sort of logical parameters for their model of reality, although it doesn't comport with the actual reality of things, right? So Leibniz was getting at that point as well, in saying, well, we do exist in this universe, putting aside, and I kid you not, he was verging on multiverse hypothesis and all that, but so putting aside any possible other realities, the fact is this universe exists the way it does. We've investigated it, we still do. If there is a God, then by default, this reality, as grand as it is so what's default to it would be, again, this term called chaos conf. Things like trees falling and so on. And in God's ontology, there wouldn't be such a thing as a tree, like a God tree or something falling on God. Like with respect to him, he's different or he's other to this reality. Now, this is the concluding point. This is why I became a Christian. The Christian message then is, and this is Leibniz's argument, kind of like Philippians 2, when it says, although he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, came into this reality, right? So the point is, if you have a marriage in that hypostatic union of both the stardust body, so Jesus's fleshy body is through evolution, right? It's stardust. But the logos that's in hypostasis with that stardust body, there's a union and a marriage of the two ontologies, the one being finite stardust, the other being the eternal logos. And then in the resurrection, there's a theosis, there's a glorification up into the God state. So in other words...
Well, so I don't understand why any of that gives us a reason why God couldn't just snap his fingers and essentially achieve what...
Yeah. No, I know what you're saying. And here's the difference. I'll conclude with these with these two examples, one with the snapping the finger and one with this. So my model sticks with evolution. So in other words, it's taken 13.8 billion years for then God to marry his ontology to the cosmos itself. For God to love the cosmos, he gave his son, right? So that then there's no more trees falling on people to happen in the resurrection. Whereas in the snap the fingers model, that sounds very quick. In other words, it's like a boom. Yes, I'm going to diverge from a tree falling on people, but I'm just going to theosis or deify it anyway immediately. So the difference between those two models is that one reality is as fast as a blink of an eye, versus the other one, which is what I hold to, is 13.8 billion years old.
Well, so I don't see a difference there.
That's the difference.
When he snaps his fingers, he could snap his fingers prior to the existence of the universe, and he could make it a delayed action, like an action that takes 1 billion years and happens before any humans exist. And so it happens prior to Adam and Eve or whatever. Both of those things would be logically possible. Both of those things
yeah. But what if that's the case as well in the 13.8 billion years instead of the 1 billion? Just like that. So in fact, you have scripture saying that he was slain as if before the foundation of the world. Like you already have. If
that's the case, then Jesus was
preloaded.
unnecessary. The millions of people who died before Jesus was an unnecessary suffering. The world flood was unnecessary. Like, if that's the case, then my model is correct to state that what God did was unnecessary suffering, and he is equally as culpable as my doctor analogy, the one of the modern age doctor. So either way, God loses as being a perfect moral agent.
I don't see why, because I see God then. The whole notion of love is that he shares in the chaos confidence of this reality. Whereas, for example, for Muslims,
What does that have to do with morality? So, like, whether or not God punishes himself and everyone else. So, like, say someone does something immoral, like shoot someone, but they also shoot themselves. Does that mean that they're loving? Like, no. In fact, it's literally irrelevant what they do to themselves. What matters is the impact on the other people who they harm. Whether or not they experience it themselves is just irrelevant. Like, who cares?
How do you react to the Muslim charge or what you see in the Quran, where there is no reason for why Allah, say, creates the reality that it does? It's a very karma-based system in Islam. It's literally Allah just if this reality didn't have any sinners, he would destroy it in order to make sure that there are indeed sinners, so that ultimately it's all a test, and then the hereafter is sensual delights. Like, those two models are completely contrary, because in the Christian model, the Christian hope is face-to-face ontological relationship with God, like theosis, like pure theosis.
Sure.
But which, I mean, look at my photo, for example. I have Jesus on a tesseract cross, all right, like a hypercube, by Salvador Dali. That in itself communicates God's not only transcendent love, but his multi-dimensional atonement for the whole cosmos. It transcends more than 3 dimensions.
Again,
Like,
I don't
that's
see the
type of
relevance
theology
here.
that I hold
Whether
to.
or not God suffers is entirely irrelevant to whether he's moral. It just doesn't make a difference. It makes 0 difference. Like, morality isn't determined by what you experience, it's what you do to other people, what happens to other people. So if you harm a bunch of people, even if you experienced 1 billion times more suffering, it wouldn't make the harm you do to other people justified or moral. And so this is a very strange fascination Christians have with the fact that God made himself suffer, like, and they think this is relevant to anything, and it's just not. It's just completely irrelevant. It just has no value morally, epistemically. It's just complete irrelevancy. It's like, what if God picked his nose one day? It's like if Christians were just completely obsessed with the fact that God picked his nose on a Tuesday. Like, well, that's amazing. Does this have any relevance to morality? Not really. No. It's propped up as a significant fact in the Bible, but it just has no relevance.
Right, but the fact is, this reality exists, and I'm reminded of, say, John Stott. He wrote The Cross of Christ back in the 80s, meditating on, say, the Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombings, right? And there were theologians back then, Japanese theologians, who, reflecting on the sheer horror of those events. So, in other words, the pain, the pain of God, like God suffering, like the God that suffers. I find that to be more interesting than gods who don't suffer. So, in other words, there's no other God in this reality that's ever, quote unquote, been nailed to a Roman cross, right? There's no God that's been enthroned in that paradoxical image. So, Jesus as the enthroned king on a stake.
Well, there's actually
Like,
lots of
that's-
gods who suffered significantly worse than that. Like Roman
Yeah, but
gods.
not for the cosmos. Not to lead to this thing called theosis that the early church.
Prometheus, for example, he's not. I
believed
think he was a human, but Prometheus was a son of a god who gave fire to humans and then was tortured for eternity for it by having his liver eaten out. I think it was a liver by an eagle every day.
Yeah,
That's
but
far worse.
For what purpose, though?
To give humanity fire so that they could thrive. That's better than what Jesus did, as far as I can tell.
No. The Prometheus myth is it has nothing to do with the what do you call it, the benefit of humans per se.
Giving people
you
fire.
You see the different.
That was pretty beneficial. That was
I mean the
huge.
whole. I mean, for example, Oppenheimer's biography. Like, Oppenheimer's famous for utilizing that with the implications of the splitting of the atom. And
one day Prometheus got in trouble with Zeus, angry over something other. Zeus has declared that man did not deserve fire because he had a kind heart and he knew how much man needed fire for food and warmth. Prometheus gave man the secret of fire, even though Zeus had told all the gods not to do that. So he literally did it for the benefit of mankind. He sacrificed of himself for the benefit of mankind.
Yeah, and then
suffered significantly more than Jesus did, because Jesus had a bad weekend. That's essentially it. He had like 3 days that were pretty unpleasant, and that was about it. Then he transported to hell and then heaven for like a day, and then he's all good. Prometheus, every single day for all eternity, will suffer in a way that was far more gruesome than Jesus ever did. For any of the 3 or so days he had a bad weekend.
Wait 1 sec. I've just got a phone call. 1 sec.
Sure.
I'll be right back. But by the way, T-Jump, thanks for interacting. It's been fun.
Sure.
Wait, T-Jump, no problem.
Huh? Anybody else?
Yo, T-Jump.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have like a question about something like that you said that like really piqued my eye, right? So when you say like, oh, it's evil for God to like actualize a state of affair, to like have evil in the world, like why would you say it's like evil from God's perspective?
I believe in objective morality. So I think there's an objective fact of the matter of what's moral or immoral. So if God drowns millions of babies in the global flood, that's objectively immoral. Whether God likes it or not, or what he thinks about it, doesn't matter, because what God thinks is a subjective state. It is a stance-dependent state. So if we're determining morality from what God thinks, that is literally the opposite of objective morality, because the definition of objective morality is stance-independent moral facts. And so if it stands dependent on what God thinks, then it's literally subjective. So you can't have an objective morality based on what God thinks. What God thinks doesn't matter if you have an objective morality.
Right. So I have to, so you made two things that that I really want to address when you said this right now. So the first thing I really want to talk to you about is the whole idea that, it's just up to God's subjective opinion. So when you say, since it's just God's subjective opinion, the reason why I fundamentally disagree with that is because an attribute of God is regardless is to reinstate truth, and he has no accidental attributes. So in every possible world, his moral system will be the exact same. Would you agree upon that?
No, there's no logical necessity there. But let's grant that for the sake of the argument. So what determines morality to God?
Whatever God commands.
And are his commands a stance, a subjective state of his opinions?
No, because God has no accidental attributes, like I said.
So it's not his command. So they grounded in his nature. Is that right?
I mean, I can say it's grounded in his essence, perhaps.
So in his essence, did he consciously determine his essence? Did he think about it and decide it? Or was his essence pre-existing prior to any conscious thoughts?
I think it's eternal. Because when you say, God decided his essence, that's presupposing there was a point in time where God did not have those attributes or did not have those essence,
right.
Which kind of argues there was a point in time when God did not have perfection.
Right. So his essence precedes his consciousness. His conscious states, his commands are all determined by his non-conscious essence.
Sorry?
So I'm asking which has control. Does his essence have control, or does his consciousness have control? If his consciousness can rewrite his essence or whatever, then his consciousness has control. If his essence determines his consciousness, then his essence has control. So I'm asking, which is the more fundamental state of God? Is it his essence or his consciousness?
Okay, so I think his consciousness is dictated by his essence. Obviously, if you have X nature to your essence. Wait, hold on. Sorry. So if you have an X essence, right? Obviously, your consciousness is going to be dependent on this essence, right? Because you're not going to have something that's contradictory to your nature, right?
Sure. I'm happy to grant that. I think that is a perfectly rational argument, and I think that you can have, if we grant that, then you can have morality without a conscious agent, because you're saying that it's grounded in his essence, not his consciousness. So you can have morality grounded in the essence of nature itself, and you don't need a God for that.
What? Wait, why do you not need a God for that?
Because you just granted that the consciousness of God is determined by his essence. And so if there's an essence, that's essentially the nature of God. You can have a nature of nature that determines morality, and you just don't need the God parts. You don't need the consciousness part at all. You can just have the essence and you're done.
But I think if the essence dictates it, it's dependent on the essence. Would you not say that?
Yes, I agree. So I just think, if there's an essence, suppose the essence of God exists, but there's no consciousness. It's just the essence. You can still have that. That's perfectly fine. That's just nature. That's naturalism. You got naturalism.
Not because the consciousness is interdependent on the essence. So if it's the case that the essence exists in X way, then the consciousness would precede that, right? Not precede that, sorry, would affirm to that, right?
Right. So the consciousness would be a result of the essence.
Which is God, right? The essence, God's essence.
Right.
So,
so you can have an essence. This is a different essence, and this different essence still has the morality stuff, but just doesn't have the consciousness stuff.
Wait, hold up. So here's the confusion I feel like we're getting at, right? So if I'm let me give you an example of what I mean, right? So let's say you have an essence of being all good, then therefore your consciousness would be a good moral standard. You cannot commit evil things if your essence is all good, right?
Right.
So in that case, this whole moral system is still interdependent on God, right? Because in this scenario, at least, right, it's God that's dictating moral commands. Because I think morality, by definition, is what God tells us is ought to do versus what's not ought to do.
So go back. So see if you can try to follow me on this. So we have the essence that determines the morality, and the essence, from the essence, you get the consciousness, and the consciousness gives the commands. But you could just delete that part. You can delete the commands, delete the consciousness. It's just gone. You just have the essence and nothing but the essence. There's no consciousness left. You still have objective morality, still there. You still have the grounds of morality. The essence is still there. And suppose this is like an alternative theory. So it's like you got the God theory, which has all three of the essence, consciousness, commands, whatever. And you have this alternative theory, which is just the essence, no consciousness, no commands. You still have morality. You just don't need the consciousness for the morality.
No, I disagree with that, because what I said was that God claims things or does things according to his essence, right? But his consciousness is what dictates morality. I don't think all morality is, in my opinion, and all it's limited to is what God commands. So when you say, you can like negate the consciousness, you can negate the commands, that for me entails a P is not P, because morality for me is dependent on the commands.
Wait, but I thought you said that it's not, because the definition of objective morality is stance independent moral facts, which means if it's just based on what God says, what he commands, that's stance dependent. That's dependent on the stance of what God's opinion is or his commands or whatever. So for it to be stance independent, that means it can't be based on his commands. It can't be based on his consciousness. It could be based on his essence. That part I'm happy to grant, but it can't be based on his consciousness.
Well, like, here's where my disagreement still lies, right? Because I'm telling you that even for God's opinion, God's not like us. Like, his opinions or like his stance is not like us, where it's subjective. I think God's stance, quote unquote, is objective, because it's metaphysically impossible for God's stance on certain things to change. That's basically the proposition.
Whether or
I'm
not
giving
things
you right
can
now.
change doesn't matter to whether or not they're objective. Objective simply means stance independent. That's literally just the definition. Whether or not it can change doesn't make a difference. It's not subjective because it can change. It's subjective because it's stance dependent. Even if you have an opinion that can never change, it still stands dependent. It's still subjective. So I don't care whether or not it can change. What makes something objective is it's a stance independent fact. So if it's dependent on God's consciousness or his commands, that is literally stance dependent.
But the issue is, even when I claim it's stance dependent, because what I'm arguing right now is that God, no matter God's stance, every single stance he has is the truthful stance, regardless of what it is, right? So like, let's say, I don't know. Like,
Okay,
he
but
says,
that's still stance dependent, right? So that's still subjective.
no, it isn't.
What?
No, it isn't, because I'll tell you why, right? So do you think truth, for example, just let's take the idea of truth, right? Do you think that's a subjective thing?
No.
Yes or no? Okay, of course, right? So what I'm telling you is that God simply, right, dictates what he asserts is truth. I think that in itself is objectivity in nature. So basically what this means, right, is that if everything that's objective to us is dependent on God. That's basically what I'm arguing.
Okay, well, that still stands dependent, so it's still subjective, so it still doesn't make any
This
sense.
is an answer. Wait, do you remember what I said, T-Jump? Can you like repeat for me what I said?
I think the issue here stems from the fact that moralism is usually denoted as there being some objective metaphysical structure that determines whatever is moral, whatever is not moral. And if you were to say that, if you were to say morality stems from God's essence or God's opinion, that would be sensible by definition.
But I'm telling you, I'm basically exempting God from that whole like.
That's called special
subjectivity.
pleading. That doesn't work. You can't.
That's called special pleading.
Hold up. I'll tell you why. Okay, there's a difference though.
By definition, you would say morality is granted by God's opinion or by God's opinion. That would be sense dependent.
Right. I'll tell you the issue though, because when you claim subjective pleading, that's basically dependent upon making a special case without reasoning. But I'm giving this direct reasoning, which is that God is the arbiter of truth, right? So when any claim God makes, regardless of what it is, any proposition he makes, given his attributes, will be the truth regardless, given that God is an omniscient entity.
But that doesn't affect anything. That doesn't change the argument. So that's not an exception. The definition is any stance-dependent belief. Anything. It doesn't matter what it is. If you could have if it's stance-dependent that 1 + 1 = 2, it's a subjective fact. It's an objective fact if that is true independent of anything the being thinks. Whether or not the being is going to change doesn't make a difference. So like if God thinks all true things, supposedly, then there's a list of true things that are true independent of whether or not God thinks them. This is true if God doesn't exist. These are true.
Yeah, I mean, you can argue that God's stances would in some some instances would obtain,
right?
Be like metaphysically constructed.
My claim is that truth is derived from God. That's basically what I'm affirming.
So they're stance dependent.
Why would that still be the case? Even from that truth comes from God, it would still be stance dependent by definition.
Hold on, give me a second.
Unless you make like the special exclusivity, and special pleading, when you would say that, oh, God is different from us.
Sorry,
it's not.
Wait, what did you say? Sorry, I wasn't listening. I was doing something. Just
unless you have a special pleading to say that
unless you were to make like some special exclusivity or some special case in which you would say God would be excluded from this. Which I would argue.
Yeah, so the issue, so like when it comes to special pleading, we obviously agree, right? special bleeding must be in a case where like there's no reasoning or no symmetry breaker between entity X and like the rest of the other entities, correct?
Not necessarily, no.
What? So like how do you think symmetry breakers work?
No. Special pleading, the way it works, is a fallacy where you cite something as an exception to a general universal principle.
Yes.
Without.
But you're right. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's fine.
Sorry for cutting you off.
Fine. So in this case, the definition of stance dependent is anything that's contingent on a stance, like an opinion, intuition, whatever, thoughts. There is no exception here for whether or not the thing is true, whether or not the thing is reality, whether or not the thing will change. None of that makes a difference to the definition. The definition is just dependent on a stance. We don't care about literally any of the other facts. So if you add in another fact and you say, well, here's some other fact that I think is a justification, that's special pleading because we don't care about the other facts. No one else has inserted another relevant fact to the definition. So it's special pleading because the justification you've added is arbitrary. Like we don't care about that. That's not something that's part of the definition. You've just added that in for your own benefit.
Right. So two things, right? This is what I'm clearly putting into question, right? Why, like, what I said is like arbitrary, right? Because I don't think it's arbitrary. I think it's extremely relevant because if truth is not interdependent on God himself, then there's no truth to begin with, right? There's no objective
That doesn't
facts.
make any sense.
It's like, hold up. I'll tell you why, right? So unless you want to negate the idea of objectivity, because God, we agree, is like morality, like most theists, the classical theist position is that God reinstates a moral position simply because he commands it, right? So something is moral because God commands it. If God commands you to kill your neighbor or whatever, right? That would be a moral position given that God commands it. That's the classical theist position, right? So in that situation, that objective morality, if you hold like an objective moral stance, by definition would be derived from God. So therefore, right, moral objectivity, any objective fact about morality, any objective fact of the universe, quite frankly, would be derived from God. So when you say, oh, it's God's subjective opinion, you're either going to do A, negate every objective fact in existence, or B, just agree with the fact that God has a symmetry breaker upon this.
Well, no, it seems you've missed the other option, is that Christians or theists are special pleading to try and make their God not subjective. So the real action here is that we define objective as stance independent. Theists define morality as God's stance on what is right or wrong. And they also define facts and reality as God's stance. So under theism, if we use the correct philosophical definitions, facts about reality are subjective to God and morality is subjective to God. That's the correct stance based on the philosophical definitions. But then there's something you said about rejecting all truth. We can just say there are truths that are independent of God. God gets no say over them. They're true whether or not God believes them. And we can still have objective truth without a God just fine. It's only in the theist worldview that presupposes that things are contingent on God.
Let's talk about.
What?
Wait, sorry? Yeah, wait. No, not you, T-Jump. I thought someone said something. Yeah, so like, there's two issues, right? I feel like you just didn't address like the symmetry breaker, because when you get the symmetry breaker, you immediately affirm the logic that we are applying to everything in a set does not apply to this other thing, right? So our conventional definitions of subjectivity and objectivity.
Well, I addressed that before. So like when you add in a symmetry breaker, the symmetry breaker needs to be relevant to the initial definition, and there is no symmetry breaker relevant to the initial definition. So like if I say the definition of objective is stance independent truth, and you say no it's not, it's stance independent truth that isn't correspondent to facts or something, that's just special plea. Like, no, that's just not relevant to the definition I gave. So even though you gave a justification, you gave a symmetry breaker, it's arbitrary. Like there's no need for that anywhere in the definition. It's just why would we include that? There's no point to include that.
Right. So here's the issue, right? The reason why every time like I give you like a definition or a justification, your response has always been something along the lines of, oh, it's arbitrary or like it's irrelevant. But like I never get a reason on why it's arbitrary or it's irrelevant. The issue is, right, if I'm literally telling you that if you're gonna say that, oh no, it's all just subjective to God's mind, even though I'm reinstating the fact that, oh, objective truths come from God, then either A, yeah, you do have to reject objectivity in nature.
No,
because if it's derived from God.
No. So again, the only thing I have to reject there is that you have a contradiction in terms that is arbitrary. So like if I say subjective means stance dependent, objective means stance independent, you can just say, yes, facts about reality are stance dependent and subjective to God's mind. Like you can perfectly well say that. That's perfectly fine. But you don't want to say that. You don't want to admit that in your worldview, everything is just subjective to God's whims, essentially, because that's bad. That sounds really bad. And so because you want to maintain the objective terminology that we use, you want to try to make a special pleading exception for your God so you can still have objective facts while they're still contingent on God's mind. That's just a contradiction. And so that's why it's special pleading, because you're adding this extra thing to accommodate your worldview that isn't necessary in any of the other worldviews. Like everyone else uses these words just fine. Like, yes, subjective, stance dependent, objective, stance independent, no exceptions ever. And you're saying, I want to add an exception because I don't like the fact that I want to have to call reality subjective because it's dependent on God's mind. That's the only reason you're adding this property. There's no other reason. Therefore, it's special pleading.
Then I have a question for you, right? Because I feel like you're misusing the definitions of objectivity and subjectivity by making it solely dependent on mind dependent or mind independence, right? So I define objectivity, and I feel like philosophers, like even as old as like Socrates or Plato, when they're making like objective good, it's just a universal standard, right? So obviously an entailment of it is, it would, wait, hold up. Obviously an entailment of it would be that it's mind independent, right? But when you say, so what I'm telling you is that something is objective, that means it's universal in every possible world, right? So obviously an entailment of it would be that mind independent.
No. So the sun exists objectively. It's not, the sun isn't
objective.
Yeah, the sun objectively exists. That is a fact. It is a
I heard subjective. Yeah. It's objectively exists.
Right, but it doesn't exist in all possible worlds. Like objective doesn't mean a universal standard. That's literally just not what it means. So when Plato used objective, he meant the exact same thing. Something that exists mind independently. Now, when we talk about objective morality, we're talking about a universal standard because most people tends to think morality is objective, is a unchanging absolute universal standard. But objective does not mean that. Objective just means stance independent. So if you want a stance independent universal fact, that would be an additional thing you add in. But the universality is irrelevant to objective. It literally doesn't matter to objective. Like rocks objectively exist. That camera objectively exists. None of these are universal. So you've added in this other criteria of universality to it, again, to try to special plead to make it fit with your God definition. But objective has nothing to do with universality. Obviously, if there was something universal, that would typically be assumed to be objective. But objectivity only requires one thing, and that's stance independent. So if you just Google objective morality is the idea that right and wrong exist factually without any importance of opinion.
Okay, so what if I told you even the sun analogy would still apply to like my universal definition stand? Because the true premise of the stand would be that the sun exists in our world, right?
No, because you said all possible worlds. Remember, you said all possible worlds. The sun does not exist in all possible worlds.
No, I know. But again, when you say the sun objectively exists, you're obviously referring to like our world, right? So you're saying the sun exists in our world.
Yeah.
That proposition is true in all possible worlds because the sun indeed does exist in our world, our universe. Even if you're in universe number 2, the sun would still exist in this universe. That's objectively and universally true in every possible world. So again, like this.
Sure, but I didn't say that. I said the sun exists, and that's an objective statement. I didn't say the sun exists in our world. That's not what I said. The sun exists. That's all I said. And that statement is objectively true. Even if you say it, say that you say it in universe 7 where there's no sun, then it would be false.
Exactly, right? So like then I could just say it's not objective.
No, it's still objective. It's still objective. It's still a fact that is true independent of minds, and it would be false independent of minds in that other universe. But the point is, whether or not it's objective is not dependent on its truth or falsity. It's dependent upon whether or not it's independent of minds.
Right. But T-Jump, the sun existing has an entailment to it, right? So the sun existing in universe 1, that's the, for example, let's say we're in universe 1, right?
No, I think you're missing the point here. So when I say it's objectively true, the part there that we're focusing on is whether or not it's true or false, independent of minds. So if you're in universe 7 and there's no sun there, that statement is still objective. It's just objectively false. The truth or falsity is irrelevant. It doesn't make a difference. The objectivity is whether or not it's independent of a stance, independent of a mind. And that part is purely determined of whether or not some stance determines it. Whether or not the statement is true or false is irrelevant. It doesn't make a difference whether the statement is true or false. It doesn't matter to whether or not it's objective.
It does though, because here's the issue, right? I feel like this is where like you're kind of begging the question, because you're saying, oh, like that's like the whole definition is like stance independent. Obviously, I agree with you. It is stance independent indeed, right? But I'm telling you that's not what it's limited to. That's it's small entailment of it. But what I'm telling you is that, oh, the sun exists, right? Or the sun doesn't exist, right? Those two like statements being objective or not objective, right? When I say the sun objectively exists, right? I'm talking obviously about the sun objectively existing here. Well, you never made the claim, right? The sun objectively exists in all possible worlds, because obviously that'd be a false statement, right? But because under my definition, like obviously the sun existing would not be subjective, right? But it's simply referring to like our manifold, our point of existence. The sun does exist
Let me
indeed.
just skip here. So Stanford Encyclopedia Philosophy. Literally, the definition of moral realism is if it exists stance independent. This is just the definition. You just Google the moral realism is the view that moral principles are stance independent.
Okay, but again, right? Even like when I'm telling you with the whole encyclopedia, even then, right? I agree with you 100%. That is indeed an entailment of it. When something is true in all possible worlds, for example, it is indeed stance independent, right? But I'm giving you examples of even like ancient philosophers like Socrates or Plato.
No, they all agree. They all agree with this. They say stance independent. You're done. Like Plato.
I agree. Also,
but that means no God, no God, not dependent on God. They literally, Stanford Encyclopedia, Plato, they all agree can't be dependent on God's mind, because that would literally be a contradiction.
Okay, all right. So here's the issue, right? T-Jump. What I'm telling you is that stance independent is an entailment of the definition I just provided. There's no like mutual exclusivity there, right? There's nothing there. And I'm listing you examples of like these philosophers, right? Like even like ancient philosophers like Socrates and Plato's, who use like these universal goods. Obviously it's stance independent given that it's universal, right? But what does Plato define it, right? This is why he even gives you like a Platonic concept, which is like independent of like all temporality, all like dimensions, all like abstractions, right? He gives like the Platonic concept of universal good, right? Those are all examples of like being true in all possible worlds that do not subscribe to your definition of only being limited to
those are all using the exact same definition, stance independent. They have other things too, but those are not relevant to whether or not it's objective. For it to be objective and those other things, it needs to be stance independent. They all agree, no mind. That's entailed in all of those philosophers' definition. In the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, it's entailed in that definition. It's entailed in every single philosophy journal ever. That you can't have it dependent on a mind, or that's literally the opposite of stance independent. Like, this is not even a controversial position. This is like just basic understanding of the terms in philosophy.
This is it, but here's it. So now I'm going to ask this question, right? Because I feel like you're going to keep like circling away from like the position. So if what I'm going to ask you right now is that, why is it limited to simply stance independent just because it says the word stance independent in like the definitions?
Because that's how it's defined. That's literally all it is. Like there's no other for it. It's just objective means stance independent. Subjective. No, it's not. I mean, definitions are.
I'm going to ask you why then. Then I'm just going to ask you why.
Well, no, there's no problem with this. Like you can just say it's subjective. Like if we accept this definition that subjective means stance dependent, and in your worldview, all morals and all facts and reality are dependent on God's stances, then everything in that world is subjective. And that's fine. There's no problem with that. You can say that if you want, but you don't want to. You think that subjectivity is bad. And because you think subjectivity is bad, you want to add this exception rule to God so he can still have objective facts and objective morality, even though it's all contingent on his mind. So there's no problem with just saying everything's subjectively contingent on God's mind. Like, you can do that. There's no problem. There's no logical contradiction.
No, but here's
you
the
just
issue,
don't
right?
want to, because you think subjectivity is bad. And so you've made this.
I think the primary where stems from the fact that the two of you are arguing under like different connotations of what can be constituted as subjective in this case. So TJ was arguing under the connotative standard that subjective would means whatever is stance dependent, and Zizo is arguing under the narrative that subjectivity means what?
Universal truth. So like what that means, like true.
Subjective, no subjective. I said subjective.
Oh, subjective, yeah. So dependent, like it would be stance dependent, right? But I don't think not B entails
So
okay, yeah, and from what I heard, Zizo is also making like a special exclusivity in this case, in which he says whatever God's stances would be, it would also be excluded from everything else. And Zizo, have you given the justification for that? The argument for that?
I have. So I explained to him that true objectivity would, in every single situation, is already derived from God, right? So in every classical theist position, right, someone says, "Oh, what's morality?" It's dependent on God, right? Simply, morality is that God commands. Whatever, it's not. Morality is not what is. Sorry, how do I word this? God does not command morality, but morality is what God commands. Basically, that's the best way I can put it, right?
So the usual formula for moral realism is that whatever exists for moral truths, there exists moral truths that are independent of stances. That's the basic formula of moral realism.
Right.
the next step, if you were to like derive whatever morality that is, whatever ethical standard that is, if you were to like arrive at like whatever constitutes.
I'm simply like deriving that from God, right? Because what else?
And the classical theist position would obviously mean that would obviously be saying that the extension upon that formula is basically whatever God commands to be the case, whether it's moral or immoral.
Sorry.
The classical theist.
What was your definition of subjective, Zizo?
Yeah, so subjective actually fits your definition in a sense. I think it is actually like limited to stance dependence because it is dependent on opinion. But here's the thing, right?
There's something really interesting I wanted to go on. So if subjectivity is simply defined as stance dependent truths or whatever,
right?
How do you define objective? Objective is the opposite of subjective, right? They're the opposite.
So yeah, so like I'm subscribing to something like similar to like Plato's theory, which is like an independent, like universal, like higher truth, right? Have you read the Timaeus, by the way?
So if we define subjective as stance dependent and objective means the opposite of that.
No, I disagree.
What?
I don't think it's necessarily the opposite.
What?
I'll tell you why, right?
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Yeah. So like when I'm subscribing like to like the Greek philosophers' theory of like Platonic theory. So basically in a simple sense, right? Although yes, being stance independent is indeed, right? An entailment of an objective position, right? I 100% here's what I disagree with you. That's simply only limited to that, right? Because I think all objectivity is a universal truth.
Okay,
like,
so
trans like Plato's theory of like a higher concept.
So
correct?
so objective is not an antonym of subjective. They're not opposites.
An entailment of it is opposing the subjective definition. That's what I would say.
So they're not antonyms. They don't just mean the opposite. They mean the opposite plus some other thing that you've added in.
It's not something that I've added in. This is like a universal definition that philosophers have applied to. Like
zero philosophers. So all philosophers think.
I just gave you two examples.
No, you
like,
don't,
what?
because no one Plato, none of the Greek philosophers think that objective and subjective are not antonyms. They all agree they're antonyms. They literally in Greek, in Roman, they're antonyms. They have words that are antonyms that literally mean the opposite of this.
That's an etymological fallacy.
No, it's not. If you want to know what Greek philosophers think, you look at the language of what the words mean. And so when they wrote down that word, they meant that word. It's very simple. So when all philosophers use the word objective and subjective, they are antonyms. They mean the opposite of one another. Now you've taken the word subjective and you agree with the definition of subjective, but then you added something else to the word objective. It's not the same, not an antonym. Now this is called special pleading. It is not accepted.
This is not a special.
Literally a special.
I gave you
pleading.
hold up, T-Jump, right? I gave you multiple examples, right, of like multiple philosophers, like Plato, like in his book, like the Timaeus. Hold up.
He's contending that. He's contending that. He's saying that Plato also argued under the narrative that they're antonyms.
I mean, I think an entailment of it is like antonymic in nature, right? Which is the fact that objectivity is indeed stance dependent, which is obviously like an opposing stance, right?
Yeah. So if you would argue on the same narrative that Plato does, you would also have to agree that they are antonyms, right?
But I said it's not limited to that for objectivity. This is like the example I was given.
So you're adding something to the definition because it's not limited.
This isn't me adding.
And the extension of that not being limited is that you appealing towards Plato's definition of universals.
Sorry?
And that's you. And your extension upon it, not being limited to that is appealing towards Plato's notion.
Yeah. So like his book.
And great. So TJ's so TJ's arguing that even under Plato's notion that they would be considered antonyms.
I mean, even then, right? I don't have an issue with that, but I'm saying it's not limited to that. That's my issue.
Yeah, I'm saying, oh my God, Joe.
All right, so it's been 2 hours. Great being here. Appreciate you guys. Most of you are awesome. I'll be back next week. You guys.
Am I awesome too?
Yes, you're awesome too.
Yeah.
I think you need to work on your logic a little bit and definitions, but I do think.
May God guide you, G-Jump.